Welcome. So in order to get an understanding of what's going on, it's important to go deep. It's important to get into the hidden meaning of things. So how do we know what the essence of something is? We look at its name. The war that's going on right now has been called, the Israeli war against Hamas, has been named by Israel. I think it was named on October 7th, Swords of Iron. And that name is very telling. First of all, when it comes to names, there is a Kabbalistic teaching, a very important teaching by the chief Kabbalist, Rabbi the great holy Ari, in which he says that when we name, especially when we name our children, there is a certain element of divine inspiration. God pops the name into our head. Or else how in the world are we supposed to know the name of a person, the name of our child? The name represents their energy, their soul energy. What do we know about souls? So God pops the name into our head. Now on October 7th, when Israel scrambled to counterattack, I can imagine that there wasn't a sitting for 2-3 hours where they're sitting and playing around with various different names. They just had to pick something really quickly. As a war starts, a war needs a name. They just, whatever popped into their head. Unless we will say that Israel, because it expects so many wars, has a whole bunch of names lined up. I don't think so. So the name was something that just kind of occurred to them. And that's because this name is significant. Swords of Iron. And what I want to talk about today is how heartwarming and how that is such amazing news. The news is related to the fact that we're using the word iron. Iron is good or iron is bad. Let's take a look at what the Torah has to say about iron. We'll start off with something that's happening this week. Friday this week is going to be, I think it's the 22nd of December, is going to be a fast day, a Jewish fast day. Hopefully, with God's help, MOSHIACH will be here before Friday, and the fast will be canceled. It will be a big holiday, as it is prophesied that all the fast days associated with the dark days of Jewish history are going to be converted into holidays. So let's hope by Friday this will not be a fast day. Just in case it will be a fast day, we will be commemorating 2,620 years since the beginning of the siege of Jerusalem. The Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar came up against Jerusalem with a mighty army and he laid siege on Jerusalem. Now God already had passed a message on to his prophet. At that time, Ezekiel, he was then in Babylonia. And the prophecy comes to him. And it's in chapter 4, verse 3 in Ezekiel. You can look it up. God tells him, and now you take a pan of iron, like a metal sheet, a pan of iron. And you should place it as a wall, kir bazer, as an iron wall, between you and the city, and this will be Yisroel. This will be a sign to Israel that troubled days, dark days are coming. So we see the usage of iron as a sign of bad news. Now, why would the sign be with an iron, everything is perfect in a prophecy. So God is telling him to use iron because iron is what all weapons are made out of. All elements of destruction from the beginning of time. Iron is a killing entity. So much so that when God instructs the Jewish people to build a home for him, when God instructs the Jewish people to build him a temple, part of the instructions are you may not use any metal in the construction of the holy temple. When it comes to certain parts of the temple, the altar, which is the most very, very prominent and most important part of the temple, you weren't even allowed to cut the stones with any iron. Even if if a piece of metal touched a stone of the altar, the entire altar becomes disqualified until you remove that stone and replace it with another stone. That's how dark God considers iron. And the Midrash tells us, the sages tell us, the reason for that is, God says as follows: the temple is meant to connect you to me. It's meant to bring atonement for man's sins. It's enable you to bond with God. I am the source of life. And therefore, material that is antithetical, material that brings death to the world, material that knives and swords, and in modern days, guns and pistols and tanks and bombs and missiles are constructed of, God says, has no room and no place in my temple. So we can understand that when God is announcing dark times for the Jewish people, that the forces of evil are coming against the Jewish people, it is introduced with the symbolic gesture of taking a pan of iron and holding it up against the city of Jerusalem, saying that the destroyer is coming, the destructive entity is coming. Let's go a little deeper. What is the root of why is iron a weapon? I mean, on a simple level, everything you can explain simply, because it's a very, very strong material, and if it hits something, it can destroy it. Like a bullet, we can understand. But everything has a deeper understanding. You see, the higher something is, meaning the closer to God it is, the more it is aware of God, and the less consciousness it is of its own self. That's the quality of the spiritual worlds. Heaven. The worlds above are filled with divine consciousness and less of consciousness of self. Therefore, they don't have much substance. That's why spirituality, we can't see it. It's beyond our perception because it doesn't have much of a substance. The more substantial something becomes, meaning as we drop down into the world of matter, that is the most ungodly of existence because matter feels itself. Within the materials of this world, the physical world is made out of the inanimate, the mineral, also the plant, and then we have animal, and then we have human. So we see that the higher, the more spiritual something is, so the softer the material that it is made out of. So wood, which is plant, can be used as a material for construction, but it's not as hard as stone. And above that are animals. The bone is pretty hard, but generally the main substance of the material of an animal is softer, human as well, because the more rigid something is, the tougher something is, the more it is absorbed in self, which means the less it is aware of a creator, and of a spiritual life force, of a godly life force that's coming to it. Within the mineral, stone is hard, but iron, when we want to even use a metaphor, something that is really, really stiff and hard and tough, we say it's an iron will, unbudgeable. So iron is a stiffness, a hardness, which represents the ultimate sense of I am and there's nothing besides me. And that's what usually leads to someone killing someone else, God forbid. To murder, I don't care about you. You have no reason to exist. I'm the only reality, and you're occupying space that I could have occupied, and therefore, boom, boom. So we understand the root of the distastefulness of the iron and why God says, I don't want it. We also see that when the Jewish people were coming to enter into the land of Israel, Joshua led them into the land, but Moshe brought them to the border of the land of Israel. There was somebody blocking the way. He was a giant. His name was Og the giant. He was a formidable enemy. And And we were really scared. Even Moses was scared of him. That's how powerful. Now Moses obviously knows God is backing him, yet he's scared of Og. It wasn't because of his physical might that he was scared. He was scared because he knew he's rooted in very, very powerful forces of evil. So we find that regarding Og, the Torah uses the word barzel, which is iron. It says, it wants to describe how enormous he was, how extraordinarily big he was. So the Torah says in Deuteronomy, it says that there is a museum amongst the Ammonim, was a nation, where they have a museum, and in that museum they keep for show the cradle, the baby cradle, where Og was kept when he was a baby. And it says, Arsoy Eres Barzel, his crib, his cradle, was made out of steel. Usually you make a baby's crib, a cradle, you make it out of wood. Because no baby, every baby, a wooden cradle suffices. But not for Og. He was such a giant even when he was a baby. They needed a steel bed for him. Now, in the Torah is not telling you just stories. Everything has very deep significance. Og, the force antithetical to the Jewish people entering the land of Israel and realizing their purpose in this world and bringing God down into this world, eventually in the land of Israel and eventually into the entire world, the force of darkness that stands against it is rooted in what? In iron. Because iron is that force of darkness. So, as mentioned before, no iron in the Holy Temple. But here we come to something magnificent, shocking. Regarding the third temple, we would all believe, and we were all believing so for thousands of years, that the third temple would also be built out of stone. There's actually two opinions regarding the third temple, if it will come down from heaven or if it will be built by humans. And one of the reconciliations is that humans will build it. It will be built under the auspices of Mashiach. But then a spiritual temple will come down from heaven and will be enclosed in the temple below. But what will be the materials of this temple? We've always believed stone, like the first two temples, the Temple of Solomon and the temple that they built under the Koresh, the king of Persia, who had them build the second temple. However, the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1992, one of the last talks, like 2-3 months before the Rebbe had a stroke and couldn't talk anymore, dropped a amazing revelation. And the Rebbe said as follows in a talk of next week's Torah portion, Vayechi, which is related to to this fast day that we're talking about, the 10th day of Tevis. Regarding this fast day, he refers to the steel, the iron pan that was set between, that the prophet had to hold up in front of Jerusalem. And the Rebbe says like this, the third temple, it's going to be an everlasting temple. It's never going to be destroyed. You know why? Because it's going to have within it the energy of iron. It's going to be including not just stone, it's going to have iron. Iron lasts forever. It's durable. The third temple will last forever. But it's not only spiritually going to have the quality of iron, physically as well. It's going to include massive amounts of iron that will be built into the third temple. It seems to go against everything we know in Judaism regarding the temple. The Rebbe addresses it. And the Rebbe says, let's for one moment stop and think. The Torah says we give the reason. Why are we not allowed to put iron into the temple when we built the temple? It's because, as mentioned earlier, because God says iron is meant to shorten human life. The temple is meant to increase human life. You cannot put the iron into my temple. The Rebbe says when Mashiach comes, in the days of Mashiach, there won't be any more evil in the world. And we have a prophecy that tells us that nation will not lift a sword against another nation. Lo yisa goy al goy cherev. That nations will not take a weapon against another. Not only that, All the weapons in the world will be converted to plowshares, which means we will use the steel, the iron in the world, instead of making tanks and missiles and bullets. It will be converted and it will be used to help produce food. It will be used in technologies and various different things that will help mankind, to feed mankind and to spread goodness and productivity in the world. That will be the usage of steel. A couple of years ago, there was a heartwarming story, a beautiful story coming out of one of the countries in South America. I don't remember where, but I remember how excited I was when I saw this story. That there is a playground which was made out of confiscated weapons. There was many gangs over there, and finally they had managed to clean up the place, confiscated all those weapons. Instead of throwing the weapons out, they took those weapons, melted it, did whatever the steel work that they needed to do, and turned it into a children's playground. That is Moshiach. Mashiach is not the eradication of evil. It's the transformation of evil, says the Rebbe. It's picking up the darkest things. That's why interesting. From all materials, even the first and second temple, which is not the ultimate temple, what's the material that is used? We don't use any wood there as well. We use stone. Why stone? Didn't we mention earlier that stone is rigid and hard, and therefore the least lending itself towards spiritual consciousness and godliness? Why the stone? The answer is the whole purpose of creation and God's intention in creating the world. God wants to have a home in that which was the most ungodly, that which was the most unfriendly towards light, towards goodness, towards kindness, that which was once a place that supported and facilitated evil inclination, negativity, ego, which is the stone, transformed. Ultimately, the matter will be holier than spirit. God will reveal himself in matter, in the physical world, more than in the most sublime spiritual heavens of heavens. And for that reason, God asks us to build him a temple made out of stone. But the Rebbe goes and takes it further. Not only will the temple have stone in it, this temple will be built with iron as well. Not only because it's not threatening anymore, but because that's the entire point. To take things that were once dark and elevate them and to transform them. That's the awesomeness of the Messianic age. No darkness anymore, all darkness converted. And a proof to this. What's the proof? Here we know that what we know so far is that there's no reason not to use the iron. There's a spiritual benefit in using the iron, showing the conversion of darkness to light. But what's the proof that we have that when it seems like in general regarding the instructions of the earlier temples that they were told not to use any iron? So the Rebbe says that if you take a look in Chronicles chapter 29, verse 2 and verse 7, when King David is preparing the materials for the building of the first temple. Now, King David was the founder of Jerusalem, built the city of Jerusalem, but God prevented him from building the temple. Why couldn't King David build the temple? God says, I know you really want to build me a temple, but you cannot do it. For the reason mentioned above. Because King David had blood dripping from his hands. He fought wars, justified wars, good wars. He fought against the forces of darkness. And he had to. There was no choice. He had to go to battle. But God says, your hands, those hands that killed and killed people, those hands cannot be the ones who construct the temple. I'll wait for your son. Your son is going to be living in an era and a time when the war won't be necessary. It will be a time of peace. And he will build my temple. So even though King David was not allowed to build the temple, he still prepared all the materials for the temple. So King David has a conversation, David HaMelech has a conversation with his son King Solomon over there, and he tells him, and he starts to listen, I prepared everything. And he lists gold and silver and copper, and including in that list is 100 talents of iron, which is in the verse. I'm going to read it. I'll read the verse over here. He says, "Ubarzel meya elef kikarim," 100 talents of iron, which is strange. The commentators ask the question, Nachmanides asks the question in the book of Genesis, Parshas Yisroel, in the end, he asks the question, why is King David preparing iron? You're not allowed to use iron in the temple. And Nachmanides says, well, the reason they needed the iron was not to build the temple, but to enable them to fashion the tools with which they later used in the temple, or the tools the building tools which what they made the temple with. They constructed the temple, they had tools. Those tools were fashioned and made with the iron. But God forbid, you can't use the iron itself in the temple. The Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, suggests and says, the reason King David prepared the iron was not for the first temple. King David was looking out. His interest was in the eternal temple. He knew that the first temple, second temple would be destroyed. He was looking out for the ultimate Beit HaMikdash, the ultimate temple. And the Beis HaMikdash, the temple of the future, is going to have iron. And that's why he set aside the iron. That's why the Rebbe says, we don't find when King Solomon is building the temple, it doesn't say that he used the iron. It says all the other materials, but not the iron. Because it didn't go into Solomon's temple. When King David prepared it, it's for the future temple. The ultimate rectification. Now, what does the iron really mean to us, to each and every one of us? The iron is referring to the iron will, because it also means metaphorically. It has a physical meaning, but it's also a metaphorical meaning. You see, when we are faced with the forces of evil, when we've gone through an exile now for already so many years of darkness, of difficulties, of challenges, when mankind was challenged by all kinds of temptation and all kinds of forces of darkness that had the power to crush us. The fact that humans and that the Jewish people are still striving for goodness, for holiness, for godliness. We're still awaiting for days of brightness. And we're working towards, and the world really, if you look at most of human beings, we see people are into doing good and kindness. How is goodness triumphing over darkness? It's because God planted in the essence of each and every one of us the iron will of the soul. Iron, the unbreakable will. So what iron, which generally means stubbornness, but a holy stubbornness, the ability to be stubborn for something good, for something godly, the very darkness itself of the unholy iron in the world forces us to dig out our iron, our stubbornness. And with that stubbornness, we fight the darkness. That's why there's another amazing teaching. The Jewish people as well have iron in their blood. I don't mean there is iron in all of our blood, but on a spiritual level, our DNA includes iron. We come from four mothers. There's patriarchs and there are the matriarchs. Now we're used to saying the matriarchs are Sarah, Rivka, Rebecca, and then Rachel and Leah, Rachel and Leah. These are the four mothers. However, I'm not referring to those four mothers. I'm referring to the mothers of the tribes, the wives of Jacob. Yaakov has four wives. Rachel, Leah, and then he has another two, Bilhah and Zilpah. These are the maidservants of each one. Each of these wives of his had a maidservant. And in the end, Jacob marries the maidservants as well, and through all four mothers together, he establishes the Jewish people. So, amazing teaching from the Kabbalah, that the first four letters, the first letter of each of the four names of our mothers, of our Jewish moms, spell the word. Bilhah is a bays, which is the base of the word barzel. Again, barzel in Hebrew means iron. Rachel Rachel is the Resh. Zilpah, which is the second maidservant, is the Zion. And the Lamed is Leah, which means the first letters of the mother's names of Israel spell iron. Because it's our mothers that given us that steel iron. Resilience, nothing will break us. And even when we are faced by a horrible tragedy of October 7th, even when we see the worst atrocities, the darkness, the darkest of the darkness, faces us like the atrociousness of evil that we saw, the Jewish people don't get broken. It looked like a second Holocaust. We're not broken. We draw out our iron sword. We go in the last war that's before Mashiach. There won't be another war. This is the final war. We take out the iron to eliminate the iron swords. And you know, the attack itself that Hamas attacked was with the intention to stop the building of the third temple. They say it themselves. That this was all about Al-Aqsa, which is the mosque on the temple where the third temple is going to stand. Talk about occupation. Our land, our temple is occupied by Al-Aqsa. So they named it that way because they say they're not happy with the way Israel has been treating Al-Aqsa. So you see that their war, physically, spiritually as well, is motivated and driven by the fear that Mashiach is coming and the third temple is going to be built. So I believe it's not it's not coincidental and by chance that the name that was chosen is the name swords of iron, because this is the battle which, once the evil is eliminated, there will be no need anymore for weapons. All weapons will be transformed. All iron will go into building the third temple, and the rest of the iron in the world will be turned into plowshares, will be used only for the benefit of mankind. This is amazing good news. So now, interesting, do you know that the atomic number for iron is number 26? 26 is the numeric value of God's name. So iron, being the most ungodly, deep inside, has within it the possibility of the greatest godliness. It's now 2,620 years since the iron was used by Ezekiel as a warning about Nebuchadnezzar's armies that are coming against Jerusalem. 2,600. It's about time that the iron this year should be flipped over already. And from the swords of iron, we will receive a temple of iron, an everlasting temple, which will last forever and ever, and with light and abundance and blessing for all of humanity forever and ever.